Penn State fans, I hope you enjoyed your bye week. No Nittany Lions football last Saturday. The Blue White Breakdown podcast, though, is back for Illinois week. Homecoming. I'm Bob Flounders, joined by David Jones, the first of two podcasts we're going to do. And Dave, as you might expect, there were a lot of quarterback questions thrown at James Franklin at his Tuesday news conference. He had some, actually, I thought some interesting answers and some stuff we could kind of read between the lines on. But I mean, Sean Clifford's not taking any reps in practice this week. So I think we pretty much know his status for the Illinois game.
I'm sorry, Bob. My mouth's full. I'm eating some Leone's calzone from our local wonderful place. So okay. I need a minute, okay?
Okay, sure. I'll just filibuster. It's okay. So James,
filibuster. No, yeah. Well, I mean, what did you come away with Christian Veilleux, a kid from Ontario, is suddenly getting almost equal reps? Is that what I heard? Or equal reps?
Splitting reps with.
Well, what does that tell you?
It tells you a lot. And I think even you could tell during the Iowa game that Roberson was not ready to play, and the crowd certainly hampered him. He is a very soft-spoken kid, but Dave, right after those 3 consecutive false starts, I was just looking around in the press box going, man, I don't know if this guy is going to be playing a lot of quarterback for Penn State moving forward if Clifford can't go, because they got a lot of tough games on the second half of the schedule. It sure sounds like Clifford is dealing with something significant. And if you're James Franklin and the staff, what do you do? I mean, it's like he said, if the competition is close and this kid's in his third year and Veilleux's only been here since January, if it's pretty close, what does that tell you? And I think they're making a determination either later today or maybe Wednesday about, do they want to look at the big picture? Or do they want to try and piece together some kind of offense that they think Roberson might be able to function in? And I know it may not show up too much against Illinois, but it's going to show up in a hurry later this second half of the year if Clifford can't go.
Yeah, they have to determine two things. I think they believe they could probably get Roberson ready with some sort of spread option where he's got dual threat capabilities. He's pretty good running through the A gap on keepers. I mean, he looked good. That was the only thing he looked good at doing in Iowa City. But do you want to devote that time if you think Clifford can A, get back for Ohio State, or B, get back at all for meaningful games after that? You got to be cutting your losses at some point here and trying to get to 10-2. I mean, after Ohio State, they've got at Maryland, and then the next big game is Michigan, which is, that's still a legitimate game that people want to see them win, and it's an important game. Michigan's undefeated and might still be undefeated at that point. So it's a worthy goal. And I think with this defense, it's still a winnable game, even with a backup quarterback, a normal backup quarterback. But you're going to need Sean Clifford to win that game. You would agree to that, right?
100%, Dave.
100%. So you have to judge when is Clifford going to be back, and what do we do as a stopgap measure until? And if the answer is a month, then you got big problems, because you're talking about Veilleux or whoever you think you can go to in the long haul, and that's a totally different question than if you're just trying to beat Illinois, the worst team in the league, legitimately the worst team in the league now. My preseason prediction of them third in the West notwithstanding, they have just kind of fun. Did you hear what happened with Veilleux, by the way, yesterday?
I was scared to ask you.
Yeah, well, we should probably deal with this on the
By the way, if he's watching Dave, if he actually watches the video of this podcast and he sees you eating a calzone, oh my gosh, he's gonna, he's sending some lackey out for something out in Champaign.
He's not. Crazy. Yeah, he'll show up here himself and go, you're gonna give me some of that calzone.
You know what?
You're gonna give me some of that, right? right? Okay. He says right after everything. He went off on his whole team yesterday and even was drawing admonishments from some of the old Illinois players who are now in the NFL, saying it was not a good look. He went off on basically everybody on offense, saying especially the offensive linemen they have, who were recruited by the prior regime. It sounded like a way to say, look, these are somebody else's guys, these aren't my guys.
Hot potato.
Because the heat's on him now, because they've looked so horrible the last 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah. And he said that we just aren't getting anything toward building this program from the offensive linemen who are already here, and we haven't had any contribution at quarterback, essentially. So I believe I got that right. Anyway, they've got all sorts of trouble, and the line. Did you notice the line yesterday? After all that, that's what happened to the line. It went from 17 to 23. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it open at 23, but maybe you saw it differently. I don't know, but Dave, just to circle back, you were talking about Roberson and the month and the big picture and a couple ways to look at it. Don't you think it's more damning that James is saying this after a bye week, when obviously Roberson probably got a long look at practice last week, and he still is not ready to say, this is the guy. I feel comfortable with Taquan Roberson. I think we can win games with him if we need to. I'm not going to name a starter, but to me, it's a non-issue as he's our backup quarterback. He didn't say that.
Yeah, the exact words were somewhat close.
Yes.
The competition between Veilleux and Roberson compared to August, when he named Roberson the clear number 2.
Yes.
That it's not a vote of confidence. Yeah. There's not a vote of confidence, and I think, especially if you consider that Clifford could come back at some point, man. If this third stringer who was never, this fourth stringer essentially, who was never in the picture until now, is suddenly in the picture, that's an indictment of Taquan Roberson.
Yeah, and I just, you knew he wasn't going to say much about Sean, and that's standard protocol for James on just about any injury. But late, I think Frank Badani asked him about his mood and what he's doing, and James said he's living in the football building, watching film, getting treatment all the time, and it just sounds like I think that if we're going to guess right on the ribs, he must be in a lot of pain, and there must be an issue that's preventing him from getting back on the field. So
yeah, it sounds like cracked ribs.
And it just, how much better is he going to be in a week for Ohio State if he's not really going to get any reps in practice this week? Or maybe do they say, look, we know what we have in him. We're just going to rest him, and hopefully next Tuesday whatever's bothering him, it's going to be negligible, and we're just going to go from there.
Yeah, the exact wording for those who have not heard from Franklin is he's doing everything he can to get back as soon as he can, doing all the right things. It was a lot of what you'd expect and very vague. Anyway, I think it's got to be a very touchy, strange thing to have to game for the staff if they think that Clifford possibly could come back in Columbus.
Right.
And only they know. I'm not even sure they know. That's the whole thing. Plus, you've got running back trouble with Ford and Lovett banged up. So now not only Keziah Holmes, but Vanover's getting more running back reps. Is that what I heard? Correct?
I don't know that. I think Amin Vanover is a defensive tackle, if that's who you're talking about. I think it's Holmes. Is Kane healthy? I don't know. Keyvon Lee, I feel like they still have 3 if they need 3, but Kane has looked so just not himself since the Auburn game, or maybe even before that I don't know what James has to do to give Keyvon Lee 15 carries in a game, but he's not ready. He's not ready to do it. I think if Lovett's healthy, he's definitely going to be back in the mix. But yeah, this running back rotation thing, it just hasn't. It worked in 2019 because Journey Brown in the final 5 weeks of the season grabbed the job by the throat and perform like an NFL caliber back. And maybe they thought that was going to happen, or maybe they didn't, but it's just not happening this year.
Who's behind Holmes? Because I almost took that he mentioned Vanover in the context of the running backs, and then said something about getting his weight down. He's a 275-pound defensive tackle. I thought maybe they're going to run him as the fridge if he could get down to 260 or something,
I don't know if we see that. I think the season might be lost, Dave. But I guess the other thing, if you're James, is this Sean Clifford's been here for a while, and I think that the plan was for him to exit stage left after this season, but. There's also a possibility that if they're not that wild about Roberson and they don't know what they have in Veilleux, maybe they want to at least take a longer look at Veilleux, because all three quarterbacks could be gone next year. You just don't know. It's a very muddied QB picture. They're expected to get a couple of really good quarterbacks in, but they're freshmen and they have not signed yet. But either there's I could see this position becoming really, really messy in the next month or so, if you don't see Clifford and you don't really feel good about the young quarterback or the third-year quarterback.
Well, the head coach could be gone after this year too.
And that also might expedite.
It might not be his problem, right?
Yeah, he could pull a Bielema. He could just say, "Hey, it's not my problem. I'm going to take some other guys and go someplace else."
Well, he was asked about regarding not having a viable backup quarterback. Through the portal, and I gave him a pass on that too, because sometimes, like I tried to explain to people after the Iowa game, that it was kind of the way he says that for instance, Anthony Russo was welcomed aboard at Michigan State because he thought he was going to be the starter, but they put him up against Peyton Thorne. And Peyton Thorne won the job, but that was the carrot that they dangled to get him there. If you can't be the starter, then you're not gonna transfer. If you don't think you can be the starter, you're not going to transfer. And that's a touchy situation. You can't have like a veteran entrenched starter like Sean Clifford and even try to BS the guy you're trying to get in that, hey, you could be the starter. They know better. They know better. So it's a touchy situation with the way the portal is.
Yeah.
Anthony Russo is now like a really viable backup for Michigan State. If Thorne gets hurt, they've got a guy who's ready to play. He played a lot at Temple. So it's hard. The way he said it, Franklin said that they try to under-promise and over-deliver as far as portal transfers and potential even recruits who want to be guaranteed a starting job, and he can't see doing that. He says we try to under-promise and over-deliver on that. But I mean, you have to be in a situation where you have a starter but not a clear-cut starter. And that's the way it is right now. And if you've got a guy who's been there and is entrenched, even if in Clifford's situation, he was battling Will Levis. Look, the guy's got a lot of experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't that kind of situation where they could legitimately tell a really good potential transfer, hey, you could be the starter. They didn't have that option, or I think they would have delivered on it. They've been able to recruit really, really well, and including in other places in the portal. I think Lovett was a great get. Ebiketie was a great get. But quarterback's a different thing, man. It's hard. It's got to be hard in this day and age for you to just acquire a viable backup quarterback.
It's the Blue White Breakdown podcast, PennLive's Penn State podcast. Dave Jones and Bob Flounders reacting to James Franklin's Tuesday news conference. We're gonna look a little bit closer at the Illinois game a little later in the week. I have two things I wanted to ask you about, Dave. Not the only significant injury is Sean Clifford. PJ Mustipher is done for the year. It's definitely, they don't say what it was. It looked to me like it was his left leg, but it was a lower body injury. He was on crutches the second half of the Iowa game, got hurt early in the game. And they, another transfer portal guy, Derek Tangelo of Duke's going to be called upon to play more. Devon Ellis, a young player, is going to be called on to play more. Keziah Izzard, who hasn't done much, is going to have to play more. But this is a position that's a little tricky for them because PJ was having a very good year. And when you don't play a lot of guys with PJ Mustipher healthy, when you lose him, so what are you supposed to do against the Ohio State offensive line and the Michigan offensive line? You said Bielema is not happy with his offensive line, but it's a veteran group that should at least know what they're doing a little bit. I think it's a cause for concern if you can't hold down the middle of the defensive line and free up those linebackers to make plays and make tackles. Dave, I think the Mustipher injury, the depth behind him, it's got to be a little concerning, I think, for Penn State.
Yeah, and they already lost Adisa Isaac before the season. That hurt their depth.
Hakeem Beamon. Yeah,
and Hakeem Beamon. So I got to give Phil Steele credit. Before the season, he thought this was going to be the number 2 defensive line in the Big Ten, and really, it has been. He was right, and I don't know that you could have seen that or anticipated that without knowing an awful lot about the depth. But now we're getting to a point where, Mustipher was also, by all accounts, a real team leader in there too. A tough guy who was an inspirational guy. Ellies seemed to hurt his left forearm accidentally it was believing it was the second quarter. So he might not be full go. He played the rest of the game. He came back and played. That was one of the injured Penn State players that Iowa fans booed off the field. Everyone's banged up this time of year, but the thing about Ohio State that's true about nobody else is they've got these recruits stacked like cordwood who can step in and just based on athletic ability be viable. They might not be great as far as knowing exactly where to go, where they should be on each play. To your point, I believe your question was about
Jacobs.
How well Jacobs has done this season. And Franklin was talking about how athletically he was fine all along, but now he's really learned where to be, the plays he needs to make as opposed to the ones he doesn't need to make in his position. That's true of all the defensive positions because you have to be gap sensitive. You have to be gap attentive, and any nose tackle, any defensive tackle has to take up space. You can't be looking to make plays all the time, and that's what young guys are constantly doing. They want to stand out. Defensive tackle is not a place for that. So there's going to be a learning curve, even certainly after Ellies. Ellies played really well, didn't you think, in that game?
Yes, he hung in there. He wasn't 100%. He came back. I think he played a little bit banged up. You're right. It looked like his left arm. I don't know what they did to get him back on the field, but he looked like he was in a little bit of pain. I think he's a guy that they really like. Keziah Izzard, I think, is going to have to really come to the front. But there's two other names I want to bring up at defensive tackle that have got Penn State in this situation. Fred Hansard, actually a couple of years ago, was in the defensive tackle rotation. He tore up a knee, and he's a big guy. Sometimes I think when you tear up a knee, it affects the rehab and the comeback a little bit more, trying to get back. But he hasn't really done much the last 2 years. And Dave, if you'll remember, Penn State, last year, one of their starting defensive tackles was Antonio Shelton. Well, he transferred to Florida this year. I mean, just having him back, if he had played his final year at Penn State, I think John Scott Jr., the defensive line coach, and Brent Pry would feel a little bit better about their depth. But he's in the SEC now. I don't know why he left, but it's really a series of unfortunate events that have led Penn State to really be deficient at defensive tackle. I would say proven defensive tackles.
Yeah, because
no Shelton, Hakeem Beamon, and they just have a lot of. They're going to be seeing some pretty good offensive lines the second half of the season. So we'll have to wait and see.
They were getting pushed and they were disruptive with 4, which hasn't always been true the last few years. With the original group, even without Isaac, the moment they started playing, they were a problem to deal with. And when you can get pressure and push in the running game, pressure in the passing game with 4, all of a sudden Brent Pry has a lot of options that he didn't have before, especially with all these great linebacker kids that he has right now.
Yeah.
He can do all sorts of stuff. Now they run the risk of turning into like Iowa's defensive line, where Phil Parker constantly has to run tricks and schemes and run fifth guys, especially in the pass rush, where he can't get any pressure with 4. You remember for the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the Penn State game, he wasn't getting any pressure on Clifford at all, and they were picking him apart. And finally, he ran Jack Campbell in a delayed blitz at Clifford, and that changed the whole game. That's what he's had to do, and that's what Pry is facing, where we returned to last year and the year before, where they couldn't get pressure with 4 because the depth issue is just getting bad in the defensive front.
I'm glad you mentioned Iowa. That was my next thing for you. I know Penn State fans enjoyed their Saturday because Iowa got pounded.
But did they really? Did they really? Was that more, do you think that was more satisfying or frustrating for them?
I think initially because of the Ferentz comments, I think it was satisfying, but I also get the frustrating take. But I guess my question, Dave, is I watched, I think, every snap of that game, and it wasn't even as close as the final score. What in the world is going on out in the Big Ten West? Because it just seems like everyone is vulnerable maybe on any given game day. You just don't know what to expect from Saturday to Saturday out there. I mean, Iowa was asking for it a couple of weeks ago at home. They were down to some team. They were a heavy favorite again. I think it might even have been an FCS team. I can't remember who it was, but they were down at halftime. No turnovers, Dave.
It was Colorado State.
Yeah. I'm sorry. They're not. They're an FBS team. Yeah. I didn't mean anything there. But I mean, no turnovers, Dave, and they're a different team.
Yeah, and they lost Riley Moss. But do you think Riley Moss would have changed that Purdue game? I mean, I read a tweet. I won't say who tweeted it out because I like the guy, but I just think he's kind of a national guy, and he can't have his finger on the pulse of this league like we do. Riley Moss isn't changing that game. Yeah. He's not gonna cover David Bell. He's not.
No one was covering David Bell in that game. It was unbelievable.
Well, it's their best cover corner isn't Riley Moss. He's kind of a thief. But Matt Hankins is their best cover corner, and David Bell's been destroying Iowa for 3 seasons now. Yes. I mean, did you see the stat? I give Tom Dienhart credit. He went back from Golden Black, and he went back and found. Did you see David Bell's stats against Iowa? That wasn't
like 600 receiving yards against him in 3 years.
35 catches, 570 yards, and 5 touchdowns in 3 games. That isn't a fluke. That's a trend. And Iowa did not have anyone to do that against Jahan Dotson any more than they did against David Bell. And you're talking about, I believe, the 2 best wide receivers in the Big Ten. The same thing would have happened with Dotson had Clifford been in the game. They just couldn't take advantage of it. So that's the frustrating part, I think, for Penn State fans. They knew what was happening at 17-3. Yeah. I mean, it was happening, and it still would have happened at 17-10. They would have scored 35 points minimum against that team. It's a representative, tough defense, but it's not a fast defense. And a lot of their turnovers are they jump routes, they play little games because they get pressure on the quarterback sometimes with their linebackers. If they don't get any pressure, man, they can't do all those tricks. And let's face it, I mean, they beat up Maryland, who has a young quarterback who's still learning, because they were jumping routes and coming out of their coverage when they were reading his eyes. Sean Clifford wasn't giving them that benefit. They were talking about Talia Tagovailoa.
Also, Spencer Petras is who we thought he was, or how that saying goes. Man,
let's not pile on Spencer Petras. But to your point about the West, oh my God! I mean, you still actually, you know, if it was a different schedule, Purdue actually would be in the driver's seat in this division. Purdue, because you saw their defense. Their defense is pretty damn good.
They have an NFL defensive end. He's a really good player. That guy's good.
George Karlaftis is the kind of disruptive player. Yeah, I mean, I love Jack Campbell, but he's a linebacker. He can't do what a disruptive defensive end. This guy's Joey Bosa caliber. Right. And I mean, he was going around those offensive tackles like they weren't there. They were like traffic cones. So you would normally give Purdue an edge to come out of the West, but their schedule is brutal. I mean, you talk about the way the divisional setup is. Iowa has nothing but West teams from here on out. At Wisconsin, at Northwestern, Minnesota, which now shapes up as the game of the West because Minnesota's in position. This is a team that lost to Bowling Green, mind you. Illinois, and at Nebraska. I mean, Minnesota has a schedule that's just about as easy, but Purdue, just through the luck of the draw, has Michigan State and at Ohio State. They're probably just going to lose. They've got to lose one of those games, and they're probably going to lose both of them, which is too bad because Purdue legitimately looks like the best team in this division now, does it not? Although they lost to Minnesota. They lost to Minnesota, so you don't know who that is.
They barely beat. They had to rally to beat Illinois 13-9. So we're going to have to close this edition of the Blue White Breakdown podcast. Dave, I just want to say this. I'm going to close with this. You can have that first round pick on Purdue's defensive line. My new hero in college football is that big defensive tackle who chugged that beer on the field when the fan threw it. It was a Bud Light too. It was probably warm. But he just picked it up and chugged it. That guy got a great shot of him. But yeah, it was very interesting to see Purdue just kind of mess up Iowa's offense, didn't turn the ball over, and what could have been for Penn State. But then Clifford gets hurt, and now we're talking about we don't even know who's going to be starting.
Yeah,
it's got to be Roberson, I think, against Illinois to start.
Yeah, they did it with three quarterbacks too. Playing three quarterbacks. It just was crazy. That's how I think overblown that Iowa defense was. They're good, but they're not as good as everyone was making them out to be. So against Illinois, they can hope to muck through this game. They really should. In a normal situation, you might consider it an emotional Valley week and a chance for a trap game. But man, I don't know. I don't know how you see Illinois beating Penn State unless Penn State just doesn't show up.
All right, Davey, we'll be back a little bit later this week to preview Penn State, Illinois, talk more about James Franklin and his quarterbacks, and offer up a prediction or two. You guys, I hope you enjoyed your bye week. It's time to start the second half of the season. The Blue White Breakdown will be right there with you guys, and we will talk some more Penn State football later in the week.